is like a representation of what this function can do. But underneath, okay, inside the implementation of printf, it's a more complicated stuff actually. Okay, ang ihang gi-perform, which is, by the way, the user need not know about how it is implemented, but as we know, uh, kabaw siya unsaon siya paggamit, unsaon pag-enter sa inputs, o unsaon pagkuha sa output. Okay? And before we start learning about creating our own function, okay, we make use of existing functions. Okay? So right now, do you get the hang out of using the different input functions like gets, getChar, getChe, scanf, okay, and how they might be different when you use them, okay? Kinsa man nga function ang dapat mo appear on the right hand side of the assignment operator. Okay? Oh, kinsa nga input function guys ang dapat mo appear sa right hand side sa assignment operator? Is that scanf, gets, or getChar? Okay. So which of the three? Okay, para magamit, it should appear on the right side of the assignment operator. Unsa ganin ang assignment operator? Miss
Scanf,
Sinisa?
sir.
Okay. Unsay scanf? Scanf ang tubag atong tulo ka book choices.
Basin, sir, basin.
Basin. Okay. So when we use scanf, okay, do we put them on the right side of the assignment operator? Okay. So do we use scanf like this? Okay. So let's say something like that. Okay. Do we put scanf on the right side of the assignment operator?
Dili, sir.
Dili.
Dili,
Dili.
sir.
Eh. So how about si gets? Do we also put it on the right side of the assignment operator? Or getChar? Okay. So kinsa may mo appear on the right side, okay, of the assignment operator.
getChar.
Okay. So it should be, or it would be,
Character.
getChar. Okay. So si get character. Dili si gets, dili si scanf, okay? So that is simply because the data nga ato ang sudlan, okay? Or the variable nga ato ang sudlan sa value nga nabasa nato sa keyboard using scanf is actually placed inside this open close parenthesis. Okay? Likewise, for gets, ang variable also appear on this section here. But for getChar, the variable would appear as a left value or L value. Okay? Oops. Okay. Sige. So let's talk about functions. So di lang kita mo dig deeper into functions. So basically kuan lang sa it's like an introduction para medyo mas masabtan nato, okay, ang ato ang program as we tried to make use of this so-called built-in functions in C. Okay? So introduction lang. It's let me. Okay, kinsay kwan ron, acting host. Okay. Kinsay acting host?
Si Kenneth, sir.
Kenneth.
Kenneth.
Okay. Oh, Kenneth. Ikay record.
Ano ako?
Oo, tanawa dira sa lower right corner. Okay, na murag shield nga symbol dira.
Meeting host.
Okay? So try og record kanang naay Squid Game na symbol. Okay, unsa na triangle, square ug circle. Okay, so nag-record na ba?
We'll start soon rin ito. Alala, sir.
Okay, kana nag-record na. Okay, so let's start our discussion about functions. Okay? So unfortunately, murag wala ni siya dito sa ato ang tawag ani, wala ni siya sa ato ang course nga gi-follow katong sa platform, wala niyang discussion. Okay? But again, ato lang ni siyang i-insert kay it is also part of the integral topics, okay, when you talk about programming. And since we can also see functions sa flow charting, it would be best if we also know how to create our own functions aside from using them. Okay, it is by creating our own functions is how we understand, okay, how these built-in functions of C works also. Okay, so what is a function? Okay, so basically it is a basic philosophy of function is to divide and conquer. Okay, so mao daw na rationale for what a function is. Okay, so by which a complicated task are successively divided into simpler and more manageable tasks which can be easily handled. Okay, so in short, if you have a very long program, especially if that program of yours nga imong gi-create has those like repetitive patterns, okay, nga imuhang gigamit, you can actually convert that into a function. Okay? So a program can be divided into smaller subprograms that can be developed and tested successfully. Okay? So just like for instance, how your programmers in C, okay, decided to create the so-called printf, scanf functions because they see nga before people would often print onto the screen, okay, ug accept input from the user, okay. So instead nga magsigig code ang user atong perting taasa nga code, okay, they tried to simplify it into a single statement, and that's how we come up with printf and scanf. Okay, so what is the advantage of using this so-called function? Okay, so as stated, it can facilitate a top-down modular programming. Okay, so that means when you design your program, okay, you think of generic solution first before going into the specifics. Okay, so mo na siya ang gipasabot ana top-down modular programming. Okay, so ang approach nimo sa problem is generic to specifics. Okay. Number two, the length of the source program can be reduced by using functions at appropriate places. Okay. So if we are not using the printf function, okay, taas-taas unta niya to ang programming. And imagine you have to memorize all those lines of codes just to print a character, an integer, or a string to the monitor. Okay? So with the help of the function, okay, pwede niya mapamubo ang imuhang source code or kanang gitawag na to nga source program. Okay? So unsa man ang source program or source code? Okay, one good example of what a source code is kananyuhang .c nga file. Okay? So that is an example of a source code. Okay? So for those who have undergone web development during their senior high, okay, unsa may extension anang ato ang file nga gi-create to create to publish web pages. Okay, unsa extension na?
HTML.
Okay, so that's HTML. Okay. So again, number one advantage of using function is that it is easy to locate and isolate a faulty function for investigation. Since sa code na to, okay, one set of operation is defined by a single line, okay, you can actually just simply comment that out, okay, para ma-check nimo sa imong program kung kinsay gadaog yagaw. Okay? So instead nga mag-add kag multiple comments, okay, to comment out that entire block that performs a single operation, pwede ra na nimo i-single comment if that has been turned into a function, which is equivalent to a single line na lang sa imong source code. Okay? So as stated here, a function may be used by many other programs. This means that a programmer can build what others have already done instead of starting over from scratch. Okay? So kung nana kay existing dira ang algorithm nga create, okay, you can actually share it with your classmates. Okay? So para kato na lang pod nga line ang ilahang gamiton to perform certain operation. But of course, when we're talking about our activities, as much as possible, don't share it all. Okay? Don't share everything. Okay? Kay di na pud na siya makatabang sa imong classmate. Wherein ang ato ang intention to give that activity is for them to learn. Okay? So another advantage of function is that a program can be used to avoid rewriting the same sequence of code at two or more locations. So mo na siya ang ato ang gipasabot ganina nga reusability sa imong code. Okay? So programming teams does a larger percentage of programming. If the program is divided into subprogram, each subprogram can be written by one or two team members of the team rather than having the whole team work to this one big complex program. Okay? So mo na nakanindot sa kanang function. Okay? Mas easy siya i-manage. Kay for example, when you're talking about cooking, okay? Kana, let's say cooking. You have already identified unsay mga ingredients, okay? So, having all the ingredients lined up there and what needs to be done, pwede nimo unsa man, micromanage. Pwede nimo ihatag og usa ka tawo ang let's say paghiwa sa mga lamas, pwede nimo ihatag sa tawo ang let's say paghugas sa mga vegetables, okay? Pwede nimo ihatag sa usa ka tawo ang let's say for example pag-combine sa tanang ingredients para isugod og sugnod. Okay? So not all people will be chopping up onions, will be chopping up the meat, okay, will be near the gas range doing the cooking, okay, kay samok na kayo. So, pwede na nimo i-assign sa katao. And basically, guys, that is how software companies work. Okay? So, they identify, okay, those, let's say, manageable functions nga dapat i-create, then they just give it to their team members to implement it. Okay? And most of the time, the other team members don't even know what the other members are doing. Okay? So they only focus on the functions that they were assigned to create. Okay? So naday usa ka team leader dira nga mo integrate sa tanang functions gi-create sa team. Okay? And even in manufacturing industry, mao pud ni gihimo actually. Nga let's say for example, you're talking about iPhones. Okay? So, did you know that some of the components sa iPhones are actually manufactured in the Philippines? Okay? So, which part of the iPhone ka ang gimanufacture sa Philippines? Na mo'y idea?
Battery, sir.
No, battery jud kaluoy jud sa Pinas. Battery rataman. Okay? So, ang casing kaluoy. Gi-lockdown jud ang mga Pinoy. Okay?
Gira.
Okay, so it is the camera actually. Okay, not necessarily the entire camera guys, but the actuator of the camera. Okay? Unsa man ang actuator? Okay? Now, have you ever noticed kanang camera ninyo when you try to take a photo nga nice subject, and if dili matunong sa subject, unsay itsura sa photo nga makuha ninyo? Di ba mo blur?
Blur. Blur.
So what do you do para mo focus dito sa subject? Okay, you click on the screen, selecting the subject. So the camera will focus its lens there. So ang actuator ana guys is kanang ni control sa pag-move sa lens. Okay? So that is actually assembled here in the Philippines. Okay? And that also is true for all its other parts. Okay? So kanilang sa China murag mo ni pinaka-assembly niya. Okay? So di pud na ihatag tanan, okay? Sa Apple sa China kay unsaon na lang kabaw biya sila sa power sa China, how good they are at copying. Okay? So kung ang production is tanan na sa usa ka company, then what will stop the company from creating their own iPhones? Okay? So to control the production of their phone, okay, and to protect their technology, okay, ilahan ng gipang subcon ang mga parts para ikabot diri sa China, assemble na lang. Okay? Okay, sao na lang no kung kuan agto pang pag-manufacture sa camera, agto ang pag-manufacture sa screen, battery, na nila tanan, they know how to produce their own iPhone. Then, pang, in less than a month, nanay mo gawas kompetensya, iPhone. Okay? Direct competitor sa iPhone. Okay? So, mo na siya guys. Okay? So, formal definition of a function is that a function is basically a complete and independent program which is used or invoked by the main program or other subprograms. Okay, so when you say invoke, that's another term for being used or being run. Okay, so when you call your scanf, when you call your printf, you are actually invoking the function or you are using the function. Okay, so the so-called function is also defined as a subprogram which receives values called arguments. Okay? So when you say receive, asa man na nato ibutang kanang value nga iyang gi-receive. Okay? So typically we put it in that open close parenthesis. Okay? So that is the arguments nga ato ang gitawag. Okay? So it can perform calculation and returns the result to the calling program. And how do we know what is the result? Okay? So you can know what the result is based on the so-called return type. Okay? So atuaran niya ang tanawon later. Okay? So what is the difference between the main program and the function? As what I told you earlier, kanang main nato, kanang so na int main or void main is an example of a function. Okay? So it is a special type of function since it serves as the entry point of our program. Okay? So with the main program, okay, you can access input from the user and you can also get or generate output for the user using scanf and printf. Okay? However, when you talk about functions, okay, a good function design would also have this so-called input. But the input will not be coming from the so-called scanf function. And the output will not be generated via the printf function, but by the return. Okay? So, actually, di data pwede kagamit og scanf o printf inside the function. Actually, yes, we can still use that because part of how a function is utilized is pwede ta mo gamit og existing library. Okay? However, as much as possible, when you are trying to design function manggod, i-take into consideration pod nato nga dili siya makaapekta sa formatting output sa user. Okay? So as much as possible, di ta mo gamit og scanf inside the function ug di pud ta mo gamit og printf inside the function. Okay? So, how do we accept input from the function? Okay, inside the open close parenthesis, kanang gitawag natong arguments or parameters. And how do we generate an output for that function? Ipaagi nato using the keyword return. Okay? So, as stated, unless the function is supposed to do an actual input, we try not to put scanf inside. Okay? So, mo na akong sulti kanina. But instead, we pass it as a parameter. Okay? And the output, of course, instead nga mogamit og printf, ipaagi nato sa return nga statement. Okay? So, in that way, we can truly say that the function is a standalone function. So, di na siya mo require og let's say additional library baron. Okay? So, again, two types of functions. Natin gitawag nga built-in function or predefined standard function which is accessible sa ato ang standard C libraries. Okay? So you can actually check this website out, okay, for the list of standard libraries in C. Okay? So when you say standard libraries, guys, pasabot ani, they are already provided for us to use. Okay? So all we need to do is to add them to your code. And how do we add them to our code again, kaning mga libraries? Okay? Unsa to ato ang gamiton nga keyword for us to be able to add this up?
Include, sir.
Hash include.
So
Anong
we use
STDI?
hash include. Okay, so stdio.h as an example of a standard library. Okay, and typically kanang stdio contains the functions scanf and printf. Okay, so mo na kung tangtangon na nimo si stdio, di na mugana si printf, di na mugana si scanf. Okay, but it seems like some compilers again would automatically add stdio. Okay, ma-recognize ra niya ang printf, but katong ubang compiler nga medyo stricto, kung di nimo mabutang si stdio.h, di po na niya i-recognize nga gamiton si printf o scanf. Okay? So, here is an example of a very useful library for every engineering student. Okay? Or for every um, engineering programmer. Okay? So kaning gitawag natong math.h. Okay? So unsa may naa aning math.h di ay. Okay? So math.h contains functions like acos, okay, which represents your arc cosine. Okay? So napoy asin, which is arcsine, og napoy atan, which is for arctangent. And where do we use this function? Okay? For what operation do we use them? Okay? Asa na ninyo nagamit si arcsine, guys? Arc cosine o arctan. Okay? So, trigonometry. Okay? So, you can use them very well for trigonometric equations. Okay? Or kaning naay mga problems involving trigonometry. Okay? So aside from those, napoy of course, kung naay arcsine, napoy sine. Kung naay arc cosine, napoy cosine. Kung naay arctan, napoy tangent. Okay? However, you should take note, okay, for you to be able to use them, the parameter nga i-supply nimo to this function should be in radians. Okay? How is radians different to the degrees nga to ang na usually ginagamit? Okay, how do they differ?
Paypay,
Hmm?
Tunga sa,
Paypay,
tunga sa diameter, sir.
katunga sa diameter.
Radian.
So if I have, let's say for example, 90 degrees. Okay? Pila mo na in radians.
45, sir.
Okay? So 45. Wait sa. Kadit lang. Sorry for the interruption. So again, how do we get the equivalent radian of an angle which is measured in degrees?
Pi over 1, sir. 180.
Pi over 180. Okay. So typically, when you talk about pi, just think of pitcha pi. Okay? So ang katunga sa pizza pie is only around 180 degrees. So that's why we use that as a converting factor. Okay? When you convert your angle in degrees, which is 180, okay? So about nga 180 is simply equivalent to a pi. Okay? So which is around 3.14 na value. Okay? So take note lang muna when you are using cosine, tangent, and sine. And of course, arctan, arcsine, and arccosine. Okay? So muna siya ibantayanan when using those functions under sa inyong math.h nga library. Okay? So ang gigamit nga unit for the parameter nga imuhang ipasa is in radians, not in degrees. Okay? So mas dali mahinumduman kung ang imuhang converting factor gamiton is kanang pi over 180 kaysa moingon ka og a constant number. Okay? Kay mas lisod memorizon. Then next we have their unsab na siya power. Okay? Kinsa may wakasway o gamit og power dere. Okay. Whom of you here haven't tried using power sa ilahang calculator? Okay? So, when you use power, there will be two parameters that will be required for the user. And those parameter is your x value and y value, wherein the y value will serve as the power of your base, and the base is represented by that variable x. Okay? So when you say pow 5 comma 3, so it's just like saying you get the value of 5 raised to the power of 3. Okay? So when you say pow, unsa may gibuhat ana? When you say 5 raised to the power of 3, what is the value?
125.
Okay, so the value would be 125. Okay, so that means you have to multiply 5 3 times. Okay, next we have there the square root. Okay, so we use that function to get the square root of x. Now, as what you can see guys, sa to ang mga previous nga function, like for the arcsine and arccosine, where is the mouse? Okay, what have you noticed? Okay, sa iyahang input. Okay, as what you can see, there's that double there. Okay, also here, okay, you can see x na double. Okay, unsa may pasabot anang double. Okay, double refers to the data type nga dapat nimong i-fed sa kani nga function, and it also talks about the data type that you will be receiving as a result of using the function. Okay, so since we're talking about math, okay, very strict man jud kaayo sa precision. Okay, so mo nang ang gigamit niya imbis nga float, gigamitan na niya og double. Okay, so nganong double ganito? Why not float? Okay, anyone? Why is it double ka ang gigamit? Why not float? Okay, any idea? Niadas? Niadas? Can you turn on your camera please? So I can see you while you are answering. Hello? Okay. Sige Niadas. Nganong double man? Why not float? I-check ang imong microphone Niadas if you are choosing the right microphone. I cannot hear you. Murag lahi ang microphone nga imong gigamit nga source. Okay. So mutabang si Mr. Kabag. Kindly open your camera, Mr. Kabag. Kaya madunggan na kung niyadas. Tudut, tudut. I cannot understand his language.
Good morning, sir.
Oh,
So,
sige,
sa
Mr.
akong note, sir, kay ang float kay 4 bytes ra ihang storage, so 6 decimal ra iyang placing value, pero sa double 8 bytes man siya, so na siya 15 decimal
Okay.
places, so mas dako ka ng range ang
Mas
double
dako
kaysa sa
range.
float.
So that means in terms of precision, guys, okay, mas taas ang precision ni double compared sa float. Okay, so that means when you do some computation, the accuracy of using double types is higher compared sa float. Okay, so mao na siya. Okay, so mao na kasagaran sa mga math function. Okay, be it in other programming language, you'll also notice that they also have this double nga data type. Okay, so mao po'y gigamit nila. Okay, so here are other functions that we could use. Okay, we have the seal. Okay, so what does the sealing do? Okay, so as stated there, it returns the smallest integer value greater than or equal to x. Okay, so as you can see, returns the smallest integer value greater than or equal to x. And what is x again? X is a type double. Okay? But even though ang iyang return type diri, ang iyang gigamit is double, integer ra ang iyang iuli. So, for instance, if I have a value of, let's say, 9.4, okay? What could be the value?
9, sir.
Okay? Would that be 9? Okay? So, if you try to test it here, asa naman to si CodeCham? CodeCham. Okay? So, you could also try that here in CodeCham. Okay? So, pang dinaliay lang. Okay? So, sharp include type. So take note, for you to be able to use those math function, all you need to do is simply include math.h. Okay? So let's say kanilang print if, okay, you get the ceiling. Okay, so seal of 9.4. Okay, so is equal to %b. Since ang iyang iuli nato is integer naman. Okay, so using the function seal 9.4. Okay, so manong full screen man. So, executing the code. Okay, o wait sa i-display na lang na to float. Okay, lahi ang ihang gi-return. Okay, so tanawa guys. Okay, so is it 9?
10,
Okay,
sir. Ano din,
10.
sir?
Ngano di ay? Returns the smallest integer value greater than or equal to x. Okay, so what integer value is greater than 9? Okay, pero gibutang biya niya no? Equal to. Okay, but when you talk about ceiling manggod guys, usually ang higher value ni siya. So even if let's say for instance ang gigamit niya dire is let's say 9.1, okay, So if that is 9.1, ang gawas dira is ang greater value gyapon. Okay? So sa pagkaingong seal, okay? It will be the bigger value. Okay? Wherein when you say floor, it will be the largest integer value less than or equal to x. Okay? So let's say for instance, again, kung ato ang padaganon, ang ato ang sample code, okay? Comparing the seal and the floor. Okay? So let's say you use here floor. Okay? And execute the code. So if si seal muhatag og 10, so expected ang kaning si floor muhatag og 9. Okay? So essentially, when you say seal di ay, kung mulapas na siya sa value, okay, automatic, okay, sa integer niya, next integer ang iyahang i-return. Whereas when you say floor, kung naay mga sobra-sobra dira nga fractional part, automatic tangtango na niya. Okay? So let's say for instance, what if ang ako ang ibutang diri sa ako ang seal is 9. Okay? 9.0. Okay? Take note, based sa definition, it is the value greater than or equal to x. So what do you think would be the value now if I run this? Would that be equivalent to 10 or would that be equivalent to 9?
9.
9, sir.
Okay. So that would be 9 gyapon. Okay? Kay wa naman mo sobra sa 9. Okay? So when you say seal di ay, murag i-round off niya, okay, to the nearest bigger integer. Regardless kung ang imuhang decimal point is above, unsa na siya? Above 0.5. Okay? So mao na si seal. Basta mo sobra na gani siya sa imuhang integer value, okay? Because of those decimal points, automatic it will get the next higher integer. Okay? Whereas when you say floor, okay, bisag pila pa na ang imuhang sobra, okay? Nga let's say for example, bisan pag moingon ka og 9.9, when you use round off, unsay mahitabuan na guys? This will be round off to 10, di ba? Kay above 0.5 man. But when you use when you use floor, okay, it will give you 9 gihapon. Okay? Kaya again, based on the definition, the floor returns the largest integer value less than or equal to x. Okay? So that is what floor and seal, okay, is in your standard function math.h. Okay? So sometimes gamit kay ni siya. Okay? Especially when you are computing grades. Okay? Labi nakita na mo nga, uy, daghan man kay nahagbong. So gamito na to ceiling. Okay? Kaya labi makagrado o let's say unsa may pinakasakit nga grado guys. 2.95, di ba? 2.45. Sus kana jud sakita na makakuha ta na nga grado eh. Okay? Gamay na lay kuwang ba. Okay? So kung gamitag ceiling, pasar na 3. Okay? But of course, sana all. Okay? So again, along the way, you'll see kung asa niya na nato magamit, si ceiling o si floor. Okay? So we also have, okay, fobs. Okay, that is absolute value for your x. Okay? So napod tay f mode, okay, which returns the remainder of x divided by y. Okay? So do you still want to use this function, f mode? Okay? So as what we can see, this can really come in handy if you want to get the remainder of two floating point numbers. Okay? So if you make use of the modulo symbol, do you still remember modulo symbol? The percent symbol? Okay? Nga kaubanay ni multiplication o ni division. Okay? So that modulo operator is only applicable to integers. But if you try to get the remainder for double nga data type, then you might want to use the fmode function. Okay? So actually, there's still a lot of functions available out there for you to explore. Okay? So you can actually check that out here, guys, under sa standard C library. Okay? So pwede na ninyo ma-check ana nga site. Okay? So try niya to explore that. Okay? But again, for our subject, okay, since you are still starting how to program, okay, we might not rely on those libraries. Okay? Kaya nga to ang purpose for this subject is for you to learn how to program. So instead of reusing these so-called libraries, maghimo tag kaugalingon natong libraries and build the algorithm, okay, into a program from scratch. Okay? In that way, mas mahanas mo og programming. Okay? Kaysa mo gamit mo og humandaan nga libraries. Okay? And basically, this is also one of the reason why Python is very tawag anay, very sikat, okay, in the field of programming. Okay? It has a very rich library wherein dali na lang kaayo ang pag-program since naghuna-huna pa lang gani ka unsay buhaton, there's actually already a function that will perform that operation nga imong gihuna. Okay? So mo nang makaingon sila nga uy sayon ramang kayo sa Python. So again, sayon ra siya because of the libraries nga gibuhat sa ubang tao. Okay? And puhon, okay, kamo niya magbuhat-buhat niya og library para pud sa ubang tao para ilahang gamiton. Okay? So mo na to ang goal diri guys, okay, as computer engineers. Okay? So you will be providing the tools that others might be using. Okay? And asa naman to? So the next type of function, okay? So humana ta sa built-in function. In C, we will not delve too much on the built-in functions. So far, as long as kabawta mo gamit og katong basic lang nga input-outputs, kanif og printf, and probably kani importante man gud ni siya sa inyong field, okay? Especially when you're talking about engineering, okay? So at least you're familiar as to where to get those functions nga makita ninyo nga naa sa inyong calculator. Okay? So that means if you have, okay, a mobile phone and you have installed there a compiler in C, you won't be needing any scientific calculator anymore. Okay? Kaya nga naman, pwede rin na nimo himuan dire og program guys in C. Okay? So anyway, for us to better understand, okay, how functions work, tanaw sa nato, okay? How to create our own function. Okay? So unsa may structure sa function? What does a function consist of? Okay? So as what we have discussed earlier, okay, a function has this so-called return type. Okay? So when you're talking about type, unsa ganito yung mga examples sa type, Hernandez? Okay. Hernandez? So, guys, kung naata sa classroom ba, okay, there's a shortcut for you to unmute your microphone, and that is by using the space bar. Okay? So you Okay, how about Miss Ijurango? Are you here? Murag absent si Mr. Hernandez. Oh,
Good
nasa
morning, sir.
morning. Murag outdoor karon si Miss Ijurango. Okay, so can you give me an example of a type?
Answer float,
Okay, so one is float. Another
vo-
one, Mr.
void,
Okay, that could also be void. Okay, how about balisado? Another one. Okay, Mr. Balisado, are you also absent? Just like Mr. Hernandez?
Morning, sir.
Naade. Oh. Another example, aside from float and void, nga sulti ni Miss Ijorango.
Team, sir.
Ha?
Team.
Int. Okay. Another one, Mr. De La Victoria.
Cars.
Okay, so we have car. So mo na ato ang gitawag guys nga mga return data type. Okay? So that means magamit po din na nimo ang mga return data type when you create your own function. Okay? So mo na ang unang ibutang nato dire, okay, sa ato ang function, ang data type, then followed by your function name. Unsa maning function name? Function name is basically just an identifier. Okay? So do you still remember how to make an identifier, Mr. Lebron?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what is the first rule in making identifiers? Always start
One
with
letter dapat a letter or one underscore.
okay. Unsay dili pwede ibutang sa identifier, Mr. Soralta?
Kanang number ang maguna, sir.
The question is unsay mga dili pwede ibutang nga character sa identifier?
Katong mga symbols,
Okay, symbols like
kanang mga symbols, sir, kanang murag at sign, mga dollar sign,
okay, so kana mga at sign, dollar sign. Unsa pa, Mr. Umandak?
Kan sir, kanang hyphen sir.
Hyphen. Okay. So those symbols. So pwede pod katong mga operators, okay? Kay lisod kay tagsa-tagsaon ingnon taw katong mga operators dito siya pwede magamit nato sa tuang identifiers. Okay? So unsa pay makita nato dira sa function, okay? We can see here the parameter list. Okay? So unsa man ang parameter list? Mao ni ato ang gitawag nga input sa ato ang function. And they could be as big as 128 kabuok possible inputs there. Okay? So there's actually virtually no limit, but I do believe wa man siguro ibuang diri nga mag-program nga moabot og 200 kabuok parameters. Okay? So usually parameters na to mo range na nag 1 to 5 siguro or dako na gani kay ng 5, 1 to 4. Okay? So wala pa koy nakitaan og function wherein naabot og 100 kabuok parameters. Okay? So when you're talking about parameter list, unsa man say iyahang syntax ana. So just like when you declare a variable, okay, you specify the data type and then the identifier. Okay? So you can have multiple parameters sa imuhang function. You simply separate them with a comma. Okay? So you can have multiple parameters there. Pwede nimo isagol ang integer, character, okay, double, floats, okay, etc. So just like there is atong example, okay, si ceil is an example of a function that requires a single parameter, a parameter of type double. Here is also another example, si fmode, which requires two parameters. Two parameters which are of type double, okay, nya duha ka buok, x and y. Okay? And then after anang pag-define nimo, okay, sa kanang gitawag nato nga function declaration, you specify how the function works by adding this statement block. Okay? This so-called block of code. Okay? So, kung makabantay mo guys, pari-pariha ra jud ni siya og structure sa kanang int main nato nga method. Di ba? Just like sa int main, kung makabantay mo, int, that is the return type, main is our function name, and wala man tay parameter list, so okay ra na di butangan. Okay? But if you want to be more specific, pwede na nimo butangan og word nga void. Okay? But again, that's optional. You may not put that word void there. And then your open close parenthesis. And of course, if you are using a return type like int, float, char, okay, or double baron, or any data type, as long as dili void, there should be a mandatory return statement. Ug unsa may i-return niya dire? Ang i-return niya nga value should be similar to the expected return type. So if let's say for example, you want to return an integer, okay? So by default, butangin na lang dayon na siya dira og variable nga integer pod. Okay? So I'll just say ans baron. Okay? So mo na i-return niya ang variable nga ans. So you can put your code here. Okay? Unsa man ang code? Those are our statements. Okay? However, if ang imong return type is void, okay, pwede ra jud na wala si return. Okay? So, if the function that you are creating it has a return type of void, that means kana nga function di na nimo makita here on the right side of your assignment operator. Okay? Kaya nga naman, since it cannot generate an output, okay, it has nothing to give on the L value. Okay? So, mo nang dili dapat makita ang kanang mga function nga naay return type nga void on the right side of the assignment operator. Okay? Yeah, just like identifiers, no function can have the same name as that of the C's reserved word. So just like identifiers, guys. Again, function names are basically identifiers ra jud gihapon na siya. Okay? So still dapat i-follow nato ang katong rule for creating identifiers. Okay? So mao na siya ang atoang definition of what a function is. So di na lang na nako basahon kay mao na to akong gi-discuss kanina. Okay? Now, let's talk about these parameters in detail. Okay? So as stated earlier, the parameters serves as an input para sa atoang function, sa atoang user-defined function. Okay? So typically, you will need to declare variables inside these parameter brackets to store the values of the parameters that are passed to your function. Okay? Now, there are two types of parameters. Kanang gitawag nato nga formal parameters, okay? Which are defined as the parameters as they appear in the function declaration. So again, unsa tong function declaration? The function declaration is when you have created your own functions o naa siya'y set of instructions that perform the operation. Okay? Then you also have the actual parameters. Okay? These are the parameters as they appear in the function call. Okay? So let's say, for instance, you have created a function for adding two numbers. Okay? Naa kay gitawag nga int sum. Okay? So naa kay int a ug naapon kay int b. Okay? So what do you do with variable a and b? Okay? So pwede ra ka moingon og oops, ing ani. Return A plus B. So we have created here a simple function that allows you to add two numbers, okay? Adding A and B, okay? So when you talk about formal parameters, mao ni siya ang ato ang gitawag na formal parameters. Okay? The parameters as they appear in the function declaration. Actual parameters unsa man ni siya? So let's say for example, inside your main method. Okay? Gigamit nimo ang function nga sum. Okay? So let's say na kay int ans is equal to sum, then let's say 5 and 7. Okay? So, nga na. So, asa ang actual parameters? The actual parameters would be kani. The parameters as they appear in the function call. And this is the so-called function call. Okay? Katong gigamit na nato ang function sa tuang program. Okay? So, that is what is meant by function call. Okay? So, do you now know the difference between what a formal parameter and what an actual parameter is? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, let us look at this example. Okay? Og mauman date ni ako ang gihatag ganina, but bas detalye. Okay? Now, can you identify here guys asa ang ato ang actual parameters?
Kailang ubos sir. Ay,
Actual, sir, ka na first.
Ang actual is ang first. Unsay first?
Kana int main, then parenthesis, then semicolon. Ay, semicolon ka ng bracket, then kanya din int sapo P1 o P2.
Unsa to? Ato ang
kailan daw
butangag
nay hash include sir na
ato ang butangag number daybe kay maglisod tag identify asa dapit ay inyo hang bote pasabot. 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11. Okay? So asa man dira ang example sa actual parameters. Okay? So asa diri? O kana ako nagibutang og number para mas dali na lang ninyo ma-point out which line nato makita ang actual parameters. So which are the actual parameters? So can we call on Mr. Codino? Are you here, Mr. Codino?
Sir. Wait.
Sige. Asa man dira, Mr. Codino. So while si Mr. Codino nagkunahuna asa, may we call on also Mr. Tobias again. Tobias Cane Hernandez. Oh. Name another also there. Actual parameter.
Hmm.
Number 10.
Number 10. Okay.
So, 9?
Ay, number 6.
Number 6. Okay. So sa number 6, asa man diri dapita sa number 6 ang actual parameter?
Okay.
Si calcsum or si sum?
Calcsum.
Patay, wajud. Okay. So take note, ang function call nato is si calcsum. Okay? Gitawag nato ang function kani. Okay? So when you talk about parameters, di ba, ang input sa ato ang function, okay, as they appear in the function calls, the parameters, o asa dapita ang parameter sa function nato makita. The parameters are those placed inside the open-close parenthesis. Okay? So again, looking at the sample code, asa dira si actual parameter.
Op1, op2.
Okay, so muna si actual parameter, op1 and op2. Are there any other actual parameters there, Mr. Hernandez? Okay, Mr. Hernandez. And we lost Mr. Hernandez again. Hinay jud kayo iyahang connection. Okay. Tobias Hernandez, could you at least turn on your camera, please? Okay, nalimot lagi mo sa atong SOP. ni. And what jud? Not responding na si Mr. Hernandez. Okay.
I-chat siya, sir. Sa chat.
Oh, nag-chat siya. Hinay connection. Sige. So, asa man ani Mr. Hernandez ang example, another example of an actual parameter. Okay, so while Mr. Hernandez is composing his answer, may we call on also Mr. Texon? Are there any other actual parameters there that we can find? Mr. Texon? Mr. Texon?
Wala na, sir.
Wala na. Okay. So, asa may mga example nato diri guys sa function call? Okay. How many functions do we see here? Okay. So, natay calc sum function. Okay? Okay, mo may gitubag ganina ni Mr. Codino, di ba? That is an example of a function call. Are there any other function calls found on the program? Guys? How about
Wala
the
na, sir.
Wala na. Si scanf o printf di ay, di na sila function. Oh, sus ka mo, Jud. Ay, maglimot-limot, God. Ora ganin na-discuss na to, that is an example of a built-in function. So, function na siya. So, kung function na siya, asa man dira ang iyahang actual parameter?
Sa scanf, sir,
Isod
kanang
og kuan, sir.
percent D o kuan.
Oh, di ba? This is the actual parameter. That is also true for printf. These are the actual parameters. Okay, so don't forget about that, guys. Okay, kana nga term. Okay, actual and formal. Ang formal parameters, we only have this one here. Nga makita sa to ang sample code. Okay, maora may makita nato nga naay. Okay, mo ni ato ang gitawag guys ha, ayaw kalimti. Function definition. Okay? O kanisiya ang naa sa ibabaw mo ni gitawag nato nga function declaration. Okay? So mo na siya now. Let's try that out. Okay, sa ato ang compiler. Asa naman tong sample dire guys. Oh. Okay. So let me just copy that one na lang. Kapoy na type. Okay. Okay. Now, unsa man ni gitawag nato nga function declaration? Okay. So, usually when you talk about function declaration, guys, okay, it only contains the return type, the function name, and the data type used for the parameter list. Okay, so actually you can also put there the variables that is being used, something like this. Okay, so but this is optional. Okay, however, in most cases this could also come in really handy if you put the variable name here. Okay? Kay para when you use that so-called IntelliSense feature of your compiler, makita day nimo diri nga, uy, ang kaning first parameter di ay is for my Augen and the second parameter is for my Aden. Okay? Kay kung di nimo ibutang si Aden o si Augen dira, when you use your IntelliSense here, okay, kadyo lang. Let me compile sa this one. Oh, nawagtang si semicolon. Okay. Oh, i-appear naghapon lagi siya. Okay. There are cases when you try to compile your program and make use of IntelliSense, usahay, dili ni siya mo appear. Okay? So, since naamang good ang function declaration diri na sa ubos, we could see it. Okay? So, just as with scanf, okay? So, sa ubang compiler, if ingani ra ang pagka-create nimo sa function declaration when you use your IntelliSense feature or code completion sa imong compiler, dili mo appear diri ang kanang variables nga gipanggamit. And again, as what I have taught you earlier, when you choose an identifier, you use an identifier name which is self-documenting. That means if you use that identifier in your program, at a glance, dapat makabaw ka para asa na siya. Okay? So, since nigawas man siya dire ang identifier, then we can say that the first parameter will serve as the number nga adan, ug ang second parameter is ang number that we will use to add it to the first number. Okay? So, again, when it comes to addition, it really won't matter kung kinsa nga number ang i-add o kinsang number ang adan. Okay? But when you talk about division, when you talk about subtraction, that's another thing. Okay? So mo nang importante kayo that you always choose, okay, a proper name for your identifiers. So they could really help you a lot during your programming. Kaya you don't need to trace back para unsam ni nga letter si A, B, ug C. Okay? So mana always take note when you are creating variables. Make it so that your identifier or your variables is self-documenting. Nga para at a glance, bisag after 2 years na nimo mabalikan ang code, you could always remember what that variable is used for. Okay? So, what will happen if I don't put this so-called function declaration? Or let's say I will just comment this out. Okay? So, as you can see, I have comment that out, kanang function declaration. So, if I try to build and compile my program, it will generate to me an error. Unsa man ni nga error? Nagamit ko og calcsum diri nga function but wala siya kailang. Anong wala man siya kailang? Nga gi-declare naman na or atuan naman nang na-define diri. Okay? It is because guys, in C programming language, before you could use a function, the compiler must know how it was implemented. Okay? Just like when you added kaning ato ang mga libraries that enables us to make use of scanf and printf. Okay? Now, kaning gitawag nato nga function declaration will serve as a summary nga kaning nga function si calcsum exists for your program, but it is defined somewhere else, and that definition is found here at the bottom of your int main. Okay? So, what if the answer nga ang function definition, why not just put it above the main method? Okay? Something like this. Kay maora man kay iyahang requirement, dapat mailhan sa niya ang function before you could use it. So, if you try to compile this, as you can see, no more errors. It's actually okay to do that, to put the function definition on top of the int main. But the problem with this, guys, is that the moment you will be creating a lot more functions and even longer functions than this one, what will happen to your main method? Your main method will be pushed down. Okay? So magkapoy na kaayo og subay sa kinaubsan kay magsigi kag scroll down. So that's why naatay gitawag nga function declaration. Okay? And all those functions nga ipang-create ninyo, bisag unsa pa nakataas, ibutang nato siya below sa main method. Para sa ato ang program, dali na lang kaayo niya nato makit-an, okay? Nga kanide nga functions nga gamiton nako sa main has already been defined below the main method. Okay? This here, your function declaration will serve as like a directory. Okay? Para mahibaw-an nimo nga, uy, naa ni siya nga function. Okay? Gidefine ni siya somewhere else lang. Okay? So again, if this is the function declaration, okay, kaning naa diri sa ubos, mo ni ato ang gitawag nga function definition. Okay? So essentially, ang common aning duha is ang ato ang signature sa ato ang function, which consists of the return type, the function name, and the parameter list. Ang kalahian lang nila is that sa function definition, anhi gibutang ang body sa function. Okay, when you talk about the body of the function, the body contains the implementation of what this function needs to do. Okay? So, take note lang mo na, guys. Okay? Okay. So, what happens when you pass, okay, a value to your function? Okay? Now, this is something also that you need to take note of. Okay? When you are passing a parameter to your function. Okay? Unsa may mahitabo if you try to pass a parameter for your function. Okay? So what do you think will happen? So let's look at some examples here. Okay? I have a program, okay, wherein na ako'y function, gitawag natong fit to inches. Okay? So sa ako ang function, na ako'y formal parameter, int fit. Okay? And I also have here my actual parameter f. Okay? So this is my function definition. And this is my function call. Okay? So take note sa main method, I have declared a variable f and I have declared a variable y. So in seeing a program, C reserves a space in the memory for you to store the value for f and the value for y. Okay? So, manay nahitabo. Now, what will happen if you call this function fit to inches? Now, take note, sa function fit to inches, as you can see here, guys, nag-declare kag variable nga fit, or rather inches, which is kani, ug naapod kay variable under sa gitawag nato nga formal parameter nga fit, which is kani. Okay? Now, when you say pass by value, what actually happened here, guys, is that if you pass your variable f to your function, okay, you are just simply performing kaning operation. Fit is equal to f. So that means kung unsay value nga naa si f, i-copy ra na niya diri sa fit. Okay? So kaning 5 nga nakita nato is just a copy of the 5 nga naa diri kang fit. So whatever we do with this value here, that will not affect the value of f nga imuhang gipasa. Okay? So mo na ang pasabot nato sa kaning gitawag nato nga pass by value. Okay? And this is the default operation of a function whenever you try to pass a variable into its parameter list. Okay? So there is also the so-called pass by reference, okay, which is an advanced topic. So di na lang sana nato siya i-tackle up. Okay? But again, that actually exists. Kaya nang gitawag nato nga pass by reference. That allows you to modify the variable nga imuhang gipasa sa imong function. Okay? So, nakasuway na bataan ng pass by reference in some of our code? Actually, you have already tried this. Kaning gitawag nato nga pass by reference. Okay? So, if you try to read the definition, when you say pass by reference, the variable arguments is renamed, not copied. Only the address of the argument is passed into the function. And with this so-called pass by reference, we can actually modify the value of the variable that is being passed. Okay? Now, based sa kana ang akong gisulti guys, have you noticed something which is similar to that one? Nga gapasa kag variable ug ang content sa variable may nausab? Okay? Where do you think did you encounter that scenario? Nga nagpasa kag variable sa function and the function was able to modify the content of the variable. Okay? Could you think of an instance nga nahitabo na siya? Okay? Anyone, guys? Hello? Anyone? Okay. Wala dyan nakahinumdum kung naka-encounter ba ana. Okay. So let me just create a sample function, double number. Okay. So I will have here one argument. I'll just call this as dnum. Okay. And what will I do with dnum? Okay. So dnum times equals 2. Okay. And I will set that as void. So that means it does not return any value. Okay. So as what you can see, what did I do here? I simply accept one parameter, and what I did to this variable dnum is I doubled it. Okay. So ako lang ni ibutang diri sa ibabaw para naatay gitawag na function declaration. Okay. So in this example, I have here, okay, one variable. Okay. And that variable, ako anang ipasa diri sa double num. Okay, whose function is simply to double the value of the variable that is being passed into it. Okay. So what I'll do first is I will try to print the value of op1. Okay? Para naatay reference. So kana. So the value of op1 before the function double. Okay? So ato ang pong i-print diri sa ubos the function of the value of op1 after the function. Okay? So let's try to see if mausab ba ni siya. Okay? So running the code. Okay? So mag-input tag value, let's say 5. Okay? And wa ta makaputang og %n. So run that again para makita nato. Again, butang kog 5. So makita nato diri guys, okay, ang 5 na value ato ang giprint as what is read on the scanf nga function. Ato siyang gisud diri sa double num, okay, si op1, okay, hoping that the value of op1 will be multiplied by 2. Okay? Again, what happened here is that, okay, so take note, atay dnum nga function. Okay? Wherein naa siya, unsa to? Dnum nga function. Naa siya double number nga function. Okay? Wherein na kay variable nga dnum. O sa to ang main, okay, gitawag nato si double number ug ato ang gipasa si op1. Okay? So what happened here is that again si op1 gisudlan nato ug unsa to nga value 5. What happens to the value of dnum when the function is called? Dnum is copied with the value of 5. And we perform the operation dnum is equal to dnum times 2. Okay? So which gives you supposed to be dnum is equal to 10. Okay? Pero when we print again the value of op, take note, pila may value ni op? 5 gihapon. Okay? So wala mausab ang value ni op. Kay ang ato ang gibuhat when we call the function, we simply copy this value to dnum and we are actually modifying dnum and not the variable op1. Okay? So mo na ang kasagarang mahitabo guys when you try to call a function. But there's actually one function nga inyong naagian wherein you were able to modify the value of the variable. Okay? Wajib ma-associate guys nga function nga inyong nagamit that performs that operation nga gi-modify ang content sa variable. Okay, Igot, any idea? Okay, how about Sinisa? Okay, do you remember any function? Okay, dara. So, Mr. Canonico told us si scanf. Okay? So, scanf is a function, okay, that performs this so-called pass by reference. Okay? Have you noticed guys when you use scanf, gipasa nimo ang variable? Were you able to modify the content of the variable?
I agree, sir.
Okay. Yes, di ba? That's one example. Okay? So what other function pud kaha ang pwede mo modify og variable? So probably you haven't used this but gets also, di ba? So when you place that variable character array in the gets function, the variable actually gets modified by the function main. Okay? By putting in there the string nga iyahang nabasa in the input string. Okay? So, kana guys, take note lang mo, ana. Okay? Kanang pass by reference o pass by value. So, most function by default is pass by value. Igo ra jud na niya kopyaon ang value sa variable nga gipasa dito. Okay? So, di mausab ang original variable. Okay? So, what about kaning gitawag nato nga functions returning variables? Unsa man sad ni siya? Okay, now when you talk about function returning variables, it is applicable to almost all data types except for void. Okay? So when the return type of your function is void, that means it is not capable of returning any value, and therefore you don't need to make use of the return keyword. Okay? So, or na guys, ang return. Okay? So the return is the way of how we can generate, okay, the result of what a function will do to the user. Okay? By using this so-called return type sa ato ang function declaration, and that keyword return sa ato ang body sa ato ang function. Okay? So again, we have this example. Okay? Let's say for instance, if we want to really get the result of the double value of dnum, okay, make sure to set this value into something. Now, let's say if you perform doubling of values for dnum, what is the appropriate return type nga to ang gamiton? Okay?
In.
So, di ba? Multiplying integers will also give you integer. So, pwede or ang imong gamiton dira is integer. Okay? So, take note of this one. So, kung mo return kag integer, so therefore, gamit ka sa keyword return, then ipasa nimo ang value ni dnum. Okay? So, this return keyword will allow you or will allow your function, okay, to generate an output, and thereby allowing dnum to be used on the saan na siya? Right hand side of the assignment operator. Okay? So for example, we have here dnum. Okay? Na kay another variable, you call it as answer. Okay? So you could put dnum here. Ans. Okay? Is equal to double of op. And thereby, if you display the answer ans, okay, o yara manam ni int, and ans is o percent di kadit lang nganong nag highlight man ni siya. Rebuild all. Conflicting types for dnum. Ay, okay, sorry. Wala to ma-update ang ato ang okay, wala to ma-update ang ato ang function declaration sa ibabaw. Okay? So if we run the program, again, placing 5 as the parameter, okay? So you can see here, madoble na ang value. Okay? So ma-generate na nato ang expected result of doubling the number. Okay? So that is the easiest way for you to acquire, okay, the data being manipulated inside the function. Okay? Mogamit kaning return type og ni keyword return. Okay? So, maor na guys ang concept. And of course, since si double maka-generate naman og value, pwede ra na nimo dili gamiton si variable answer actually. Since kabaw naman ka, it would generate an integer, you can use the function as a parameter sa kaning printf. Since si double num, the function call will be generating an integer, ang iyang gi-generate nga value nga integer will be placed here instead. Okay? So again, running that same code, butang ko dirag value 4, multiplying it by 2, this here generates the value of 8, and that is being printed here. Okay? So nakita ninyo guys, now imagine lang taas-taas pa nga mathematical operations gi-perform ninyo dire. Like let's say nag-perform mo og calculus, differential equation. Okay? Lingaw kaayo, di ba? So you could actually create a program for that. But of course, as of now, murag di pa ta pwede mo gamit or mo perform og integral calculus kay medyo kulang pa nga to ang nahibaw-an because when you talk about integral calculus, you need to perform loops ng operation. Okay? So far, question guys? With how the parameters of a function is used and how the return type of a function is used? And how... Unsa to? So malinog, yes?
Ano yung din lang sa itong ubos na itong sa decoration, sir? Itong return din lang, sir.
Nganong
Return din lang, sir.
kani sa return?
Okay.
Okay? This is the value nga ganahan nato makuha as a result of you performing this operation. Okay? So, again, this could be anything, guys. Okay? Now, let's say, for example, nakagi-perform ng operation dire. Diba? Dinam, which is kaning variable. Diba? Kani. Now, it is also possible for you to add another variable here. Let's say x baron, wherein kana si x would be a value of dinam, okay, nga imuhang giadan og 3 baron. Okay? So pwede ra pud na siya mai-return nimo as long as again nganong C man na siya kadit lang. Okay? So as long as of course ang i-return nimo na value, that variable nga imong i-return should be similar to the return type. Okay? So it does not necessarily mean nga kung unsay gipasa nimo sa imuhang function, mao pud na imong i-return. Ang i-return nimo nga value could be any integer value nga imuhang gigamit inside your function. Okay? So again, just think of x here as the value nga imuhang i-generate as a result of performing this operation, kaning pag double num. Maingon pa kag double num plus 3. Okay, kay mo man atong gibuhat diri, double ang num and then we plus 3. Then that is the name of our function. Okay? So, any more question guys before we proceed? Question? Sige, padayon ta. Next, we have this scope. Okay? Unsa man siya ning term nga scope? So, as stated there, a scope in any programming is a region of program where a defined variable can have its existence and beyond that variable, it cannot be accessed. Okay? Unsa may pasabutan na? A scope in any programming is a region of a program where a defined variable can have its existence and beyond that variable, it cannot be accessed. Okay? What could that mean man, ang scope? Now, under sa scope rules, natay gitawag nga local variables. Again, variables. Okay? How do we make a variable again? Unsa man to yung requirement when creating a variable, guys? Mr. Gabato?
Right.
Okay, unsay kailangan for us to be able to create a variable? Can you turn on your microphone please and camera as you answer? Ang local variable ba unsa ni siya? Alo, bago pang mata si Mr. Gabato. Ayay. Nakatulog. Okay? So unsa ni siya, Mr. Gabato, when you create a variable, unsa to yung mga required for creating a variable?
Nalimot ko, sir.
Patay. Call a friend.
Wala friend, sir.
Sige, call a friend.
Sir,
And Oh, katungwa pa na to matawag.
Kaya sir, Kent lang si Kent. Katong Sindigo.
Si kinsa?
Kent siya nga sir na limot ko siya nga apelido.
Amigo mo? Lagi kalimtan ng pangan.
Kanonigo
Kinsa?
rin sir, Kanonigo.
Kanonigo, si Kanon.
Oo, sir.
Nabas Kanonigo ron. Kanonigo asa. Toras Kanonigo. Ikaw kuno Kanonigo, friend. Ambot lag madawat ba nimo as friend? Gikalimtan nimo apelyido. Gabato, unsa kuno question? Be, paki-on ang camera again Gabato and Mr. Kanonigo.
Ang local variables nito to ba?
Patay.
Oh,
Guys, mabot akong pangutana ganina, guys. Unsaon paghimo sa local variable? Murag di man siguro. What are the requirements of creating a variable? Okay, a simple variable. Okay, and okay, so that is how you create a variable ha, Mr. Gabato. Dapat specify nimo ang data type, then followed by the identifier. Okay? Now, when creating your variables as stated here, you could either create a so-called local variable, ug matud pa ni Mr. Canonigo, when creating local variables, ibutang na siya sulod sa function or a block. Okay, unsa may pasabutan na inside a function or a block. And when you talk about global variables, these are variables that are created outside of all functions. Okay? Now, unsa may gibuhat anang local variables. So again, all these statements kamo nalay basa ana. Okay, let's proceed directly to the example. Okay? So let me just copy that for a while. Okay, para ato ang paran diri sa ato ang compiler. Okay? So ibutang na lang nato largo sa compiler. So as we discuss it, makita sa ninyo what actually happens here. Okay? So we can see G is an example of a global variable declaration. And B here, A and B are example of local variable declaration. Anong gitawag man nato silang global o local. So based sa definition ganina, you declare a variable. If the variable is declared outside the function, which is kani, it is a global variable. It is called a local variable if the variable has been declared within a statement block or inside a function. So it satisfies both conditions. This is our statement block. And this variable here are declared inside it. So that's why we call this as local variable. Okay? Now, how will these two differ? Okay? Now, let's run this sample code. Okay? From the sample code, all we did was initialize A to 10, B to 20, G. Initialize na to with the value of A and B. And we simply print out the variables. Okay? So far, so good, guys? Okay? There's nothing special about the program, right? Okay. Now, let's try to create another function. Okay? So just like the function that we have created earlier, si double. Si double num. Okay? Then I have here, let's say, a value. What value will I use here? Let's say a value of int gihapon. I'll just call it as any num. Okay. And inside this, okay, what I will do is I will create another variable. I'll call it as A. Okay, so si A will simply be equal to any num times 2. Okay, and I'll also put here B is equal to A. Okay, times 2 again, or rather times 2 lang yapon. And what value will we return here? Let's say we return the value of A. Okay, so again, para magamit nato si int double num, all I need to do is put the declaration on top. Okay, so ana na kay butang before sa global variable, or rather I'll put it after sa global variable declaration. Okay, so if I run the code again, kaning printf, and display the value of A and B and G, okay, after calling double num, okay, so let's say double num is equal to, let's say, B baron. Okay, pila expected output na to ani, guys? Okay, can you trace the output of the program? Okay, so wa ko mo gamit og scanf, gabutang lang kog value diretso for A, B, and G. Okay, so what do you think will be the value of A, B, and G here once I run this code? Okay, so the value would be 10, what's ito? 10, 20, and 30. Okay, so according to Lebron, that's also it. 10, 20, and 30. Okay, so let's try to analyze. Okay, walay compile error ani. Namang ko'y A niya, nagamit na po si A dire. Would this compile? Let's try. Okay, so wala siya mo compile kay ngano man ang ato ang gigamit dire, oh. Unsa man ni siya to ang gipasa? Character. Okay, that is the formal parameter. So dapat actual parameter ang ato ang ibutang. So let's say ako ang ipasa dira si A. Okay, so again, I'll compile this again. Okay, so as you can see, wala na error. Okay, 0 errors and 0 warning. Okay, so how about the rest? Same ram of prediction. So according to Villacampa, it's 10, 40, and 50. Okay, so any other answers? Okay, so who would go with 10, 20, and 30? So napa 20, 40, and 60. Okay, according to Mr. Umanda. Okay, so mangutan ako sa Mr. Kinsa nga to ang tawag ni Mr. Sumalino. Okay, why did you say that the output would be 10, 20, and 30? Paano na siya, no? A, B, C?
Ang i-counter ka na una na printf, sir.
Oh, kani. Okay. So kung ang ikaduha, unsa may output sa ikaduha?
Ako sa calculator,
Gi-compute pa. Sige. Gi-compute pa ni Mr. So
Kala
malinaw.
friend sir, Kervin sir.
Nyaro, una ko sa nato kaning mga nang answer. Villacampa. Okay, how did you come up with 10, 40, and 50?
Kuan sir, karan 20 times, ay, either 10, 40, 50 ako sir, or 20, 20, 40.
20, 20, 40.
Ah,
So si A mahimong 20
yes, yeah. B kay
and
still,
then
ang B
si
kay
B
20.
20 and
Yeah.
si G mahimong 40.
Yes.
Okay? So diin man kana nga value. How did you come up with 20 for A after executing this operation?
Kay base sa katong kaning A equals ininam times 2 sir, kay ang
Mm.
kuan man sir. Like karang A kay ang value sa A kay 10 man. Na, ay, wait. Sakto ba?
Ang
Ako
value ni
explain
A.
survey. Parehas may
Ah,
answer, sir.
sige, sige. Sige, Mr. Amanda, kindly explain to us, okay?
Kay Conan, sir, diri sa ubos survey. Ang int A, sir, kay multiply man siya Conan, sir. Silbi, times siya 2.
Mhm.
So, na 20 si A. Yeah,
Mhm.
si B, wala man. So, as is ra, sir. Yeah,
Okay.
sa operation man sa G, sir, kay A plus B man, sir. Which is ang A na to, 20 na. I-plus na ng 20, mo na 40 ang G.
Giplasan og 20.
Oh, no, diri sir, right? Sa babaw, bitan na. Kini G,
Kani.
sir, A plus.
So ang B,
Ay, ang lang, sir. Mga
naambot na lang. Okay. How about ang uban guys? Any idea? Okay. How to do about this? Kadit lang ha. Wait siya. Naamay nanawag.
Anal sir.
Kadit lang. Kinsam ning nanawag. Mm, okay, sorry. So asa na ganito? Okay, now let's try to trace guys. Okay. So when you talk about these so-called local variables, okay, as stated here, local variables can only be used on statements that are inside that function or block code. Okay. So local variables are not known to the functions outside their own. Okay, so muna to ang timanan with local variables. Whereas global variables, as stated here, global variables are able to hold their values throughout the lifetime of your program and they can be accessed inside any functions defined for the program. Okay? So mo na ang usa sa feature ni global variable. Magamit nimo siya bisag asa nga function. And they exist throughout the lifetime of the program. Okay? Ngano day ang local variable? As stated, the local variable can only be used inside its block code and will not be known outside that block or that function. Okay? Now, in our example, as what we can see here, okay, A and B are local variables. That means A and B nga variable will only be known in this function block. That means kaning si A dire o kaning A nga gi-create pod nato inside the double num are actually treated differently by the compiler despite the fact that they share the same identifier. Okay? So kani nga A is magamit ra nimo sa kani nga function. O kani nga A dire can only be used in this function also. So walay conflict. Okay? Di ba kabantay mo if you declare A again on the same block. Okay? Be it imuha pa nang giusab into a float. If you run that code, okay? Asan man to? So if you run this code, compile, okay, that would actually generate an error. Okay? So unsay error niya? Conflicting types. Kay declare naman nimo sa A dire. So you are not allowed to use A again. But how come we were able to use A here? It's because the compiler cannot check that A over there to be in conflict with the A that was declared in this statement block. Okay? So, mao na siya. So, that means ang variable A ug B nimo dire can only be used in this function block. So, again, when we print this value, we were able to get 10 and 20 for A and B. Whereas si G, as stated, could be accessed anywhere in the function. So sa atong program, giuna natog set si G to have a value of pila gani? 30, di ba? Because of adding A plus B and assigning it to G. So when we call this function, unsa may gibuhat nato ani? So as you can see, gipasa nako si A. What is the value of A? 10. Multiplying it by 2, pilay value ni A?
20, sir.
20. So mo na gi-return nato. Gi-return nato for the new value of B. So that means B here will have a value of 20. Okay? What about A? What is the value of A? Take note sa atong discussion ganina, pass by value. So only the value of A is being passed sa function. That means A here will remain the same. So you'll still have a value of 10. Okay, so kuan no, kinsa may sakto na ani. So sakto si Sumalinog, which is ang ihang gi-answer is para man day ani. Okay, so si Lebron. Okay, si Lebron sakto na. Okay? Si A is 10, B is 20. Pero dili ma-explain kung diin gikan si 30. Okay, how about si Villacampa? Oy, medyo nasipya si Villacampa. 40 man ang iyang value for B. Okay, now how about G? What will happen to G? So we know G here is displayed as 30, di ba? Dire, 30. So let's put the comment that is 10, 20, and 30. Abot dire, kabauta nga si A still is 10 and B is 20. Okay. However, what is the value of G? Okay. So as what we know, G already has a value of 30 here. Pero gi-modify na to ang value ni G to have a value of A, which is, by the way, pila si A?
G, sir.
20.
20. Then gi-multiply na to by 2.
24.
Okay? So expected na to 40 si G dira. Okay? So nganong ang i-display man dire 40 si G nga naman siya ani nga function. Take note, G is a global variable. That means G exists here. G exists everywhere. G can be manipulated and modified by any function in the program. Okay? That is G. Bisag kinsa ray pwede mo gamit. Pero si A, which is a local variable, only this function can use A. Okay? And this A declared here is a different A from this function here. Okay? So, mo nang kung padagano nato ang program, okay? This is the result of running the code. Okay? So ato ang gipakita diri guys, ato ang gi-demonstrate how global variables are affected, okay, by the functions. And we have also seen here how local variables, okay, are affected only within the statement block. Okay? So as you can see, si A diri ato ang giusab, but actually when we try to print A again, walay nahitabo. Okay? Ang iyang value remains as is diri because the A that we have modified here is a different type of A. Okay, now to make it a bit more clear, okay, unsa may nahitabo dahil sa Suds computer ana sir nganong ing ana man na siya. Okay, now inside your computer guys, again, when you say global variable, that means that variable is accessible by everybody. Okay, so this variable is stored in your memory in such a way that it could be accessed by any function. Okay, and then here comes main. Okay, pagtawag nimo ni main, okay, nag-create siya og murag special location for your program wherein those variables A and B are stored. Okay, so nana siya iyang location dira on that part of the memory. Okay, now it so happened that inside the main method, imuhang gitawag si double num. Double num is another function. So mo niyang nahitabo guys. Okay, so it creates another storage for your variable. And what variable would that be? Variable for any num. Okay, allocate check storage for that, and another variable for A. Okay, now you might be wondering, asa man si G gibutang dira sir? Gigamit man si G within the function. G still lives on this location where everybody can access it. Okay, so ingan yang mahitabo, when you run the program, si A gibutangan og 10, si B gibutangan og 20. Okay? So what did we do with G? G can be accessed by anyone. So 10 plus 20 natay 30. Okay? So maninahitabo diri nga line. And then we print the value. After printing the value, we call the function double num A. Okay? So unsa gibutang kang any num? Ang value ni A, which is unsa man? 10. Okay? And then what did we do that with that value of 10 inside the function? Natay variable A. Gi-multiply nato si any num by 2. So we have A here to have a value of 20. And then inside the function, gi-modify nato si G to be equal to A times 2. So 20 times 2, that now becomes 40. Okay, so ingan nang nahitabo guys. Now, the moment you exit from this function, okay, mo ning gitawag dato nga ang lifespan sa variable is only contained inside the statement block. So the moment you leave this statement block ni double num, what happens to your variable here is that they are removed from the memory. Boom. Okay? So when you print the value for A, B, okay, so si B dire 20 man gihapon kay mao may gibutang, and G mao ni ang value nga ato ang ma-print, 10, 20 and 40. Okay? So since main is like, for example, the handler of all the code in your program, the moment that the moment the main function reaches the asterisk, again, all the memory that has been reserved for your applications are released. Okay? So, ingana ang mahitabo, guys. Okay? So, any variable declared outside the function main is accessible by everyone. Okay, mo na to ang gitawag na global variable. And as a programmer, okay, you should how do you say this? You should refrain from declaring global variables. Okay? Kay nganong di man ta magamit og global variables, kanindot ra na. Okay? When you declare a global variable, any function can access that location. Okay? What do you think is the disadvantage of having a variable that can be used by anyone? Okay? What do you think is the disadvantage? The disadvantage would be, guys, is that you might lose track of what is happening to G. Like for example, dire, G has a value of 30. Pag abot diri si G nahimong 40. Kani nga function doesn't know what is the previous value of G. Kay igo ra man niya gi-assignan. Okay? So the moment mahuman ning function, wag tang rapod ang ihang memory of G. Okay? So that practice of using global variables can be very, very how do you call it? Cumbersome, okay? Especially when you are writing very long codes, okay? So it could generate unnecessary problems during the creation of your program, especially kung makalimot na ka asa na siya gigamit. Okay? So mo nang as much as possible when creating the programs, make it so that you will be declaring your variables locally inside ra jud sa function. Okay? So are we clear about that, guys? So again, you can declare your variables outside the main method. That is possible. And that is what we call as global variables. Okay? But as much as possible, kung pwede malihayan, atuan ng likayan o gamit si global variable. Okay? As much as possible, when you declare your variables, declare the variables locally. Okay? So that would, how do you call it? Save you from unnecessary headaches in the future when implementing your program, especially if your program tends to become so long now. Okay? So what else? Okay. Any other questions so far with local and global variables? Are we clear on that?
Asam na kasagaran gamiton ng global, sir.
Asa man na kasagaran gamiton ang global. Okay? So, actually, pwede raman jud ti gamiton ang global variable. Okay? Kay it, how do you call this? Programming practice nowadays, okay, are promoting local variables. Kay nga naman, again, as what I told you, okay, when you use global variables, okay, it is for those situations wherein you need a single variable that is common to all your functions in your program. Okay? You might use that example, let's say, when you are trying to create a constant. Okay? A constant value. Okay? Are you still with me, guys? Unsa ganitong constant variables?
Di mausab, sir.
Dili siya mausab. Okay? So that might be necessary if you convert that into a global variable. Since kabaw man ka na there is no instance wherein that variable could be modified by other function. Okay? So you can declare that variable as global. Okay? However, if you declare a global variable which is editable, okay, just make sure, okay, you keep track of its value. Okay? So there are also cases wherein, let's say, there's a need for a global variable, a variable that will be common for all. Okay, like for instance, talking about, so may mga example aning global variable. Okay, uh, daghan man ko na eh. Pati man jud good kay siya nga practice mo nang bisag ako di ko kahuna-huna og application for global variable kay it's been konsad ba murag in programming, murag it's part of those so-called taboo in programming. Okay, nga as much as possible kung pwede malihayan ang paggamit og global variable, lihayi. Okay, in the olden practice, most variables or most variable declaration is done globally. Okay, but as software engineering progresses, nakita sa mga programmer nga dili siya nindot nga practice to declare your variable globally. Okay, now again, as what I've told you, okay, there might be instance wherein it can be very useful, especially guys, if you're trying to save memory. Okay, kanidi ay, if you want to save memory. Okay, have you heard of Arduino?
Kanang sa mga robot sir.
Okay, kanang gamit for robotics. So katong mga nakaagi og STEM track. Okay, so I do believe most of you have undergone training on Arduino. Okay, unsa may numero problema ani niya? Okay, number one problem is the so-called memory. Okay, so when you're talking about memory size of an Arduino Uno, pertira jong gamaya sa memory aning Arduino. Di gani nakaabot og megabytes. Okay? Ang memory ani niya naara sa kilobytes. Okay? So that is probably one of the instances wherein you might want to need to create a global variable, because if you create a global variable, okay, just like atong sa drawing nato ganina, when you create a global variable, anyone can access this location. Since this is a shared location, any function pwede makagamit ani. Okay? So if, let's say for example, if you just want to make use of a variable to act as a temporary storage, okay? So if you have a function that will use, let's say, GA and GB as temporary storage lang for computation, instead of creating another storage here, okay, let's say nanasod kay laing function there, instead of creating another storage that will be utilizing a temporary storage for processing, diba, as you can see, oh, these are temporary storage which is murag di jud necessary nga imong store ang ihang value. You use it lang for temporary purposes wherein, let's say, kung naakay i-multiply ba, then i-assign na nimo temporary storage, then after that i-add nimo, store na sa nimo temporary storage. Okay, you would need variables like that. If let's say every function has that temporary storage use, when you run your application, di ba, it will utilize a lot of memory in your computer. Pero if you simply use this so-called global variable, then therefore there's no need for you to allocate memory, okay, for those functions. They would just simply use the global variable. Ikabot ni mo dire, di ba? Gamit siya ni G of A. But you have to be very careful nga once you are using J and A here, you don't modify them while you haven't exit this function yet. Okay? So, maora jud nato ang bantayan. Okay? So, kana siya very useful labi na sa mga embedded systems wherein ang memory is scarce. Okay? But when you talk about here sa PC, murag dili kayo siya problema. kay have tons of memory. Okay? Abot gud nag minimum of 4 gig inyong memory. Okay? So what else? Any more question? Hello, hello, hello.
Wala pa, sir.
Wala pa. Okay, sige lang. Next meeting we'll have activities with regards to the so-called function. Okay? Para makatry pud mo o create og inyong function. Okay? So try to remember guys your geometry. Okay? Unsa pa? Geometry, unsa pa may mga nindot himuan og function. Trigo sa calculus murag dili sa kay medyo complicated pa ang iyahang process for computing. Okay? So anyway, padayon ta going na to the last part of our discussion. Okay? So we have already discussed about this so-called function prototype earlier. Okay? So unsa ganitong function prototype, unsay gamit ato niya? Okay? So it gives us a summary of the return type and what type of data it will be returning. Okay? It also tells us about the number of arguments being passed to the function and what type those arguments are or unsay iyang data type. Okay? So it will also tells us the order of which the arguments are passed into the function. Like for example, if there are 5 arguments, you can have the first argument as an integer, then the next as a character, then the next is a decimal or double baron. Okay? So again, where do we put the function prototype? Before the function call or after the function call?
Sir, sir.
Before.
Ay,
Okay?
sorry, sir. Tama.
Prototype pa man ni guys, prototype. So when you say function prototype, this is actually equivalent katong gitawag nato ganina nga function declaration. Okay? So those two are used synonymously. Take note lang, function prototype aka function declaration. Okay? So mao ra man ay sulod sa function prototype or function declaration. Ang return type, ang function name, ug ang parameter list. It doesn't contain the definition. Unsa man tong definition? The things that the function will be doing inside the open close curly brace. Okay? So that function prototypes actually tells your compiler, okay, to leave a placeholder in the compiled code which is then filled once the code has its definition when compiled. So unsa man ang placeholder? Again, mura ba na siya kuan kanang nag-reserve og space nga that function exists and it will be defined later. Okay? So the function definition code could come after the main function block, just like what we have shown in the previous example, or even be in a separate file. Okay? So later na ta na mag-discuss kanang separate file. So kasagaran sa atong buhaton sa aron is single file nga mga programs. Okay? All the things needed to be done is located on a single file. Okay? So possibly when you create your program, it could contain multiple files. Yes, that's possible. Okay? So take note lang, the function prototype must appear before the code block in which the function is utilized. So sa atong example ganina, that's what we did. Okay? We defined the declaration before the line it was used. And kung nakabantay mo ganina, okay, when I declared this function, ako siyang gibutang right after sa variable int g. Kay nga naman, what will happen if I put int g after the function int double num? Okay? So if we try to compile the program, okay, as you can see, it actually didn't give me warnings or compile error. Okay, if we run it also, it didn't give me any error. Okay, nganong wala man siya mo error, sir, nga inside the double num, okay, gigamit nimo si G. Take note, this is just a placeholder indicating that somewhere along your code, okay, this function exists. Okay? So, not necessarily si G, mo lang nitimanan ninyo guys. Anhara mo makaka-encounter og error when you use G, okay, nga wala pa nimo siya ma-declare. But since si G diri nga define nato, after naman siya gi-declare diri sa ibabaw, okay, we were spared of that error. Despite the fact nga giuna nato butang diri ang function declaration. Okay, again, sa function declaration, it didn't check pa the definition which is found after na sa main. Okay? So, moro pod nato ang bantayanan pod sa ato ang main nga program. When you declare your local variables, make sure that you declare your variables before that line of code where the variables are used. Okay? Okay, if you declare the variables right after the line where it was utilized, like something like this, okay? Ato ibutang dire, okay? So ipadaga nato mo error jud na siya kay ngano man gigamit nimo nga wala pa nimo ila-ilaha. Okay? So di ba lain kayo? Gagamit na kag variable niya, wa ka ba unsa man na siya nga variable? Okay? Imuha nang gigamit but wa ka ba what that variable is? For all I know, it could be a float. So therefore, sayop imuhang constant value nga gi-assign because this isn't a constant value for floating point numbers. So that's why it is very important that before you use any variable, you should declare it first. Para ang compiler pud makabaw how to treat and store that value in the variable. Okay? So mo na siya guys. Okay? So that is our example of a function prototype. Okay? So what is needed to be done if we don't have a function prototype? Again, as what I've shown you earlier, all you need to do is just place the function definition before the main. Okay, again, before you could use the function, dapat ang compiler na may idea how to use the function. Okay? So here are the different types of functions that you may be able to create. Okay? So a function with no arguments and no return value. So may pasabutan ng no arguments and no return value. Okay? So that means those are functions that could have this signature. Void ang return type and void put ang iyahang parameter list. So again, you can simply write this function similar to you without putting in the keyword void for the parameter list. Okay? So you could also create functions with no arguments but with return values. Unsa man ang with return values but without arguments. So again, you can have here an int, okay, but no arguments. So that means naka-void. Okay? So unsa pa? You can have functions with arguments but no return values. So that means ang return nimo is void o na kay function that could probably have one or two parameters. Now let's say int or a character. Okay, na input. Or you could also have functions with a return type. Let's say again, murag gamit na kay si int. Let's try to use float. For then napud siya parameter list. So nagamit naman manong floor naman na float. And probably you have a double, you also have an int. Okay? So these are some of the most common ways of creating your variables, ingani nga mga combination. Okay? So most of our examples nga gipakita is na belong diri. Na ay return type ug na ay parameter list. Okay? Si printf, asa man na belong si printf. Okay? So if you use your IntelliSense, okay, you use this one, as you can see, printf is a function that returns, okay, a value and has what? Has a parameter. Okay? How about si scanf? Okay? So scanf is also a function that returns a value and has a parameter. Okay? But oftentimes we don't use the parameter being returned by scanf. Okay? So, mo ano na siya guys, overview of functions. Okay? So, here we have examples lang of functions without return types and um, without parameters. Okay? Here is an example of a function wherein wala siya i-return nga value but naa siya parameter list. Okay? And problem lang ani nga type of function is that what will you do with the data nga imuhang gilabay diri without you being able to get the result? Okay? So, mo nang panahon na siguro that you might need to make use of output functions like printf para makita nimo diretso sa monitor. Okay? So, naputay functions, okay, with no arguments but na ay return values. With no return values. Okay? So, kani void nya walay walay argument. Okay? So, pwede na nimo butangan og return, but of course, ang return nimo walay value nga i-return. Okay? So, it really won't matter. Okay? So, asa man nimo magamit? Probably, you can use it if you want to create something like this. Like, you want to create a border para sa imuhang i-display sa monitor. Nga instead nga magsigi kag /n, printf /n, you can just say border. So, pwede na nimo ma-reuse guys sa imong program. Okay? Now, what is the advantage of these so-called functions as compared to just simply i-copy and paste na lang day nako, sir? Okay? Now, the advantage ani guys of simply making use of function is again katong gitawag na kong reusability. Okay? Unsa man din ang reusability aside sa per minimum magamit-gamit. Okay? Aside sa reusability purpose is that since kaning a function occupies memory space gihapon in the memory, di ba? As I told you, when you run your application, kanang program nimo i-store na niya sa memory. So, let's say for example ha, kani nga code kapila ka gabutang og border, kaduha. Pila ka lines ang imong gigamit? 1, 2, 3. So, originally, if you don't make use of a function, this is what your program will look like. Naakay tulo ka lines for the border, then you have there some statement baron, ato alang na i-represent with a single line. Then you will have another 3 lines, okay, for that border nasad. Kung ang ato ang gigamit dire is cut and paste. Okay, gi-cut nimo si printf until /n, then you paste it here. Imagine, tanawa, pila ka lines of codes ang naa sa ato ang program karon. Okay? We have 7 lines of codes. Pero when you use this so-called function, guys, mao ni ang iyang buhaton. Okay? You have already defined here pila ka lines ang gigamit ni border, which is 3 lines. When you call this function, what your program actually does is it points to that location where that function is defined. and it performs that function. Okay? So it goes to that memory location where the function definition is defined. If this again encounters that function nga imong gitawag, it will then go to that line of code. So ang machine code nimo is considerably shorter as compared kung imuha ni siyang gi-cut and paste si printf nimo sa imuhang code. So imagine if border gigamit nimo 1,000 times. So that means na nakay 3,000 line of codes kung wala ka mo gamit og function. But if nigamit kag function, okay, nakay 3,000 lines, okay, or nakay 1,000 lines for the border plus 3 lines sa implementation. So you only have 1,300 lines of codes placed in the memory, and that can save a lot, okay, sa
Wala
imong
na
memory.
sir.
Unsa to?
Wala lagi sudog folder sir.
Mura siya og
Di sudog folder.
mura siya gisud og folder. Unsa to? Mura gisud og folder?
O sir, question to sir.
Not necessarily mura gisud og folder, but again, di ba naghisgot ta og machine code? Imagine kani siya ba, kaning program nimo. If you're using function, ingani mo gud na mahitabo. If this is your function nga gi-create, let's say 5 lines of code, it will be placed in the memory. Let's say anhi nagsugod si main. So there's also that set of instructions written. Okay? Now let's say along the instructions, mutawag siya sa function. So kani siya, if you encounter this function call during execution sa computer, igo ra na siya mo point to that location. Then i-run niya ang function. So kung maka-encounter na po siya mo, jump ra na siya to this one. Then execute the function. Now imagine if you didn't use the function here, igo ra na nimo gi-copy ang code. So let's say ingani ang mahitabo, di ba? 1 2 nya dire 1 2 3 4. This represents this line. Kung imuha rang gi-cut and paste ang sulod, wa ka mo gamit og function. So again, 1 2 another line, then gamit na pud kag function, another set of 4 lines that represents this. Then 1 line. Okay? So imagine, no, if you use function, ing-ani ra ka move ang memory nga magamit nimo. If you don't use a function and you just keep on simply copying that routine, that instruction in your code, it could really make your code longer. Okay? So ang power manggod sa function imuhang ma-experience when you keep on using the function in your code. Okay? Anha ta maka-appreciate sa memory nga iyahang nakonsumo. Okay? So maybe for now murag dili pa kayo ninyo ma-appreciate kanang maghisgot ta og makasave og memory kay again when you run your computer manggod or your program in your computer, dako manggod kayo ang memory sa inyong computer. Okay? So, mo nang dili kita ka-appreciate. Okay? But later on, when you will start working on system nga lesser ang memory, then you can say nga gamit gyud kayo ang function. Okay? As of now, let's think of function as a way to organize, okay, our code. Okay? And reuse those common nga routine na permi natong buhaton. Okay? So that will be the end of our topic for functions. Okay? So next meeting, can we again have a sort of activity na pod in CodeChum? Okay? Relating to function?
Practice na sa sir.
Ha? Unsa?
Practice na sa sir.
Practice lang sa. Okay. So more exercise. Sige.
Anong
Let's
way score sir?
kanang Y score. Then how will we know kung nakasabot ba sa topic or wala? Okay. So probably first part exercise. Okay. Then second part activity nga graded. Okay? Just like katong giansira ninyo. Okay? So far, taas ra jud kay ako ang time nga gihatag. Okay? Kung magtan-aw ko sa result sa code chum, okay? Wa pan jud na ko matan-aw code by code. So, di na ko makita pa kay wa pa man gud ma-implement ang katong plagiarism checker. Okay? So, once ma-add na to nila